On October 24th, 2021, Mussolini once again was in the headlines. This time, it was not Benito Mussolini, but his great-grandson, Romano Mussolini, who had just played his first professional football or soccer match. Romano, though, desired to be left alone, and only wanted to be reported on because of his play on the pitch rather than because of his name. While he may desire to be talked about as a footballer, the fact that his great-grandfather was Benito Mussolini, Romano will always have to deal with the legacy of his name. It did not help him that the team he plays for, SS Lazio out of Rome, has a reputation for having fans that are neo-fascists and supporters of not just Mussolini, but also Hitler. In today's lecture, we will undertake a history of sports in Italy, with a focus on football, and examine the ways Mussolini and his regime used sports to advance their political agenda. The focus on sports over other institutions is being done due to the huge popularity sports has over society. Sports is one of the few cultural practices that can cross barriers and appeals to a massive cross-section of society. Sports participants and fans can come from every class, gender, race, country, and political identity. A history of sports helps to show the nature of society while highlighting the struggles, debates, and values of the society being examined. As this lecture will show, sports have always reflected society, and it has always been used to advance political agendas. You will note, going through the lecture, that there is a significant lack of attention to women in sports. This was particularly done due to the heavy emphasis Mussolini and the Fascists placed on male athleticism over female physical activity. It was also done because a serious discussion of women in Italian sports is part of the assigned reading for this week. Rather than repeat what the article by Sarah Morgan says, the lecture will examine the role of professional sports in Italy during the fascist regime, which was exclusively male. To begin, we will examine the rise of organized and professional sports that began in the late 19th and into the early 20th century. Sports and games have existed for thousands of years, and at various times were highly organized into leagues, tournaments, or other competitions. The development of modern sports culture came out of Europe, more specifically, Britain and France, during the later half of the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution had altered how people understood time and leisure. No longer working from sun up to sun down, people now had free time in evenings and on weekends to entertain themselves. Fearing that a modern lifestyle was making people soft, headmasters of elite British schools began encouraging their pupils to participate in sports, and they began organizing them to help them keep fit, active, and strong. The students, upon graduating, wanted to continue to play and so established the first independent leagues and tournaments for their sports. They also began codifying the rules to ensure everyone knew how to play. One of the first sports to do this was football, which saw the current rules of the game created in a pub outside of London, England in 1863. French headmasters and leaders, inspired by the British, followed in their footsteps. French historian and teacher Pierre de Coubertin sought to inspire international cooperation and fitness by creating the Olympics in 1894. While sports originated as an upper and middle class institution, it soon spread to the working classes, and specifically industrial workers in major cities. Factory workers sought out and were encouraged by their bosses to enter into sports as a way to keep them out of trouble and also promote fitness. Workers soon began forming their own teams to play against the old schoolboys, and factory teams across Britain, France, and Germany became hugely popular. Other factory workers were highly entertained and began paying to watch games. Yet working-class teams could not win major tournaments or competitions because their players did not have the time to practice due to having to work full-time jobs compared to the upper-class players. As teams made more money, they began paying their players to stop working in factories and solely practice their sport to get better. This ignited the amateur versus professional debate. While efforts were made to ensure all athletes remained amateur, the quality of the games were poorer when compared to professional games. Football was one of the first sports to accept professionals in the game, resulting in it becoming more popular than others. The first professional team to win a major football trophy was in 1883. By the start of the First World War, football and many other sports were professional. The Olympics, though, maintained their amateur status, and many sports still to this day in the Olympics are amateur. Turning to Italy, the development of sport was much more haphazard and delayed due to several reasons. The first was the late development of industrialization in Italy. The Industrial Revolution laid the groundwork for organized and professional sports to develop, and due to the late arrival of industrialization, Italians were slower than other European nations to develop a sporting culture. The development of teams and clubs did not occur until the 1890s and the early decades of the 20th century. Further causing problems was the lack of industrial distribution across the country. As was mentioned when discussing Italy before totalitarianism, northern Italy, particularly the northwest, was more industrialized than southern Italy, that was mostly agrarian and suffered from high levels of poverty. The failure of Italy to uniformly industrialize would have a lasting effect on sports in the country. The poverty of Italy saw many turn to sports that were cheap and would have improved other aspects of their life. One of the most popular sports in Italy was bicycle racing. Many people got into the sport as bikes were cheap and useful for their everyday life outside of sport. The popularity of bikes for basic transportation made it an easy sport for people to get involved with. The major bike race in Italy, the Giro d'Italia, began in 1909 and was only paused for the World Wars. The other problem was that the most popular sports did not originate in Italy. Football, for example, was English, and it came to Italy as members of Italy's elite sought to replicate British life and through the hiring of British workers to help set up factories and railways. The export of industrial expertise by Britain was also included the rules and love of playing football and other games. Italians therefore had to be taught to play and to organize sports for them, and no one took that responsibility on. The liberal state, the elites of Italian society, took no interest in trying to spread sports amongst the masses. Unlike in Britain and France, the teachers of Italian schools did not see the value in teaching students to play sports, and the government did not see it as a priority to change the curriculum to have more physical activity. This left the door open for other institutions to take advantage and encourage sports. The Catholic Church had long supported the development of sports in their organizations and social clubs. The Church had seen sports as an important role in the development of healthy churchgoers, and it had attracted people to be more involved with the Church. However, the Church in Italy refused to encourage the participation in foreign sports, like football, and instead only allowed gymnastics to be sponsored by them. The result was that while the Church had a strong influence on the development of gymnastics until the rise of the fascist regime, they failed to attract most of society that was more interested in football or other sports like cycling. The socialist and labor movements in Italy also had the opportunity to encourage sports. Socialist movements had used sports to great success in parts of England and particularly in Germany to develop leagues and clubs that ensured worker solidarity and camaraderie. In Italy, though, the lack of large-scale industrialization meant that socialists were only able to reach a small contingent of the population. Italian socialists, seeing most sports clubs and teams as being controlled by Italian elites, viewed them as dangerous and tools of the working class to subjugate the workers. Many theorists and leaders discouraged participation in sports to fight. Mussolini, when he was still part of the Socialist Party, even wrote an article calling on socialists to sabotage a bicycle race by throwing nails onto the road. While other socialists saw a usefulness in sports to appeal to the masses and encourage participation, the infighting within Italian socialists left sports open for others to engage with it. The rise of the fascists in Italy saw them move on sports in a way that others had not before. Sport was seen as a useful tool for Mussolini and the fascists to advance their political agenda. Fascists became attracted to sports for several reasons. The first was the usefulness of sports to advance the idea of the uomo nuovo fascista, the new fascist man. The fascists saw sports, and particularly team sports, as being reminiscent to war. Players had to work together as a unit to achieve victory through skill, but also determination and discipline. The failure of one to pull their weight and contribute would hurt everyone. The team was also structured like a military unit, with a captain who commanded the team and a manager or coach that operated from behind to train and coordinate the team. Fascists saw sports as a training ground for war, with the benefit that it did not kill the trainees. Fascists also saw the sports as something more than the liberal government, Catholic Church, and Socialist Party did, a way of reaching out to the masses and encouraging their participation in and engagement with fascist party ideology. Controlling sports would allow the fascists to influence how Italians saw the fascist party, highlighting their work to create a better Italy, improve the lives of the citizens, and encourage them to participate in fascist politics. The poor connection the fascists had to Italy's working class, one that remained throughout their regime, meant they had to find ways to keep them happy, at bay, and engaged with them in some degree. Using sports, the fascists could ensure they kept the masses under their thumb. The final reason the fascists saw sports as important was the ability of sports to unify the nation. A major issue fascists had with the previous liberal government was the fact they had failed to create an Italian culture and that Italy was still very regionalized. Using sports, and specifically international sporting competitions, Mussolini and the fascists saw an opportunity to create a unified nation under their rule. The trials of sports teams would showcase the strength of Italy to the world, and encouraging Italians to support them would ensure that they saw themselves as Italians instead of their traditional local identities. It is important to highlight that Mussolini and the fascists supported team sports over individual ones. Bicycle races had grown in popularity in Italy before the First World War, but due to the individual nature of the sport, the fascists saw it as dangerous for them. The celebrity status of the athlete damaged the only celebrity they wanted in Italy, Mussolini's cult of personality. Team sports also highlighted fascist and totalitarian ideology as the individual was consumed by the collective to achieve success. When sports celebrities did emerge in team sports, Mussolini acted to shut them down quickly. Augusto Parboni, a popular fascist journalist, outlined 4 principles that underlined the fascist goals and ways of influencing sports and physical education in Italy. 1. The fusion of the classical Greco-Roman concept of physical education with the medieval element of warlike preparation. 2. To solve the problem of propaganda with the creation of large stadia, or stadiums. 3. To penetrate the masses with the creation of numerous gymnasia and sports fields. 4. To no longer leave teaching in the hands of exponents of old-style gymnastics, but to entrust it to the young who were strong and ready, not only physically. To achieve part of these principles, the fascists created the ONB and the OND, which we have discussed in class already. Parboni, though, represents one of the key groups who contributed and aided the fascist takeover of sports: journalists. Compared to other types of reporting, sports was seen to be apolitical due to it simply relating the scores, events, and outcomes of competitions. Yet sports journalists who were fascists played a major role in the promotion and fascist takeover of sports in Italy. The leading figure was Lando Ferretti. A journalist, he fought in the First World War where he served in the Italian army. After the war, he returned to journalism, working for the magazine La Gazzetta dello Sport from 1919 to 1924. During this time, he also joined the Fascist Party, participating in the March on Rome in 1922. In 1926, his work as a journalist was rewarded as he was named Mussolini's press secretary. He became very close to Mussolini and was promoted in 1928 to head of the official press office, where he was a key figure in censorship. He continued to work in journalism, as in 1928 he was one of the founders of the new sports magazine Lo Sport Fascista. Ferretti was one of the strongest advocates for reforming sports in Italy, and being a close associate of Mussolini, he was able to enact the changes he desired. In 1926, he began a restructuring of Italian football to bring the most popular sport in Italy under the fascist control. Italian football had its first organized competition in 1898. Founded by elites in northern Italy, football exploded in popularity after the First World War. A massive increase in the number of clubs competing saw a growing state of chaos in the game. Bigger teams wanted more control and an elite competition, while smaller teams wanted a fair chance to compete for championships. Fueling the growth was increased revenue from ticket sales and competing local rivalries. These included inter-city rivals, but also regional rivalries, as neighboring towns and cities put significant stock in their teams. Clubs unhappy with the organization of the game broke out into separate leagues, often dictated by region and club wealth. Rich teams hated playing poor teams due to the lack of proper facilities and the lack of money being made on the games. Officiating had also become a problem, as referees were seen as biased and lacking in training. The struggle through the early 1920s left football in a state of chaos and disrepute. The game was on the verge of collapse if it was not restructured and reorganized. It was at this point Ferretti stepped in. While efforts to restructure football had been made before, because it was organized by the club executives or others involved with the game, it had failed to stick. Ferretti was president of the Italian Olympic Committee and as such was outside the power struggles that had come before. Closely associated with fascism, Ferretti worked with members of the Fascist Party to reorganize the game and set up a new structure for Italian football. Ferretti saw the reform of football as vital, as it would show the ability of fascism to impose self-discipline, national unity, and improve physical fitness. If his reforms failed, Ferretti knew that football would be subject to excessive police reforms and shut down entirely as being anti-fascist. The new organization, enshrined in the Carta di Viareggio, saw the leadership imbued with fascist ideology and control, as the leaders would be selected from an assembly nominated by Mussolini himself. The headquarters for the Italian football moved out of northern Italy and to Rome, where it was brought into the government's bureaucratic structure. The major issue of regionalism in football was addressed with the elimination of regional leagues and competitions. In 1929, Ferretti ended the old regional structure and introduced a new national league called Serie A. This national league was made up of 16 teams, the top 8 teams from the north and the top 8 teams from the south. A league below, Serie B, would allow other teams to be promoted to the top league while the weakest teams would be demoted. The structure pushed the national structure and unified the game as an Italian action, helping to eliminate the regional power structures. To compete in this new league, many smaller clubs were forced to unite with local rivals to create new clubs. The merger of their assets allowed for a more united club from different cities and regions of Italy, making them more competitive than before. Ferretti's efforts worked, as football was saved by the fascists, who had now control over the sport and were able to use it to guide Italians towards fascist ideals. To guide them, the fascists needed to influence the fan culture. It was the fans, the masses, that the fascists were really interested in speaking to and controlling. One means of influencing the masses to participate was the construction of new sports facilities. Italy was lacking both high-quality facilities as well as public ones. Southern Italy had it worse than northern Italy, but even in Rome, the only sports fields and gymnasiums in the capital were private or owned by the army in 1923. With the reform of football, the fascists saw an opportunity to create new sports facilities for the public. Beginning in 1928, the government introduced legislation that promoted and supported the construction of new stadiums and sports grounds. This proved highly successful, as by 1930 there were over 3,280 new sports grounds across the country. The government, though, was more interested in supporting the construction of major stadiums. The first major stadium built was in Bologna, named the Stadio Littoriale in 1927, and served as inspiration for the legislation for stadium construction. Another major stadium built by Mussolini was the Stadio dei Cipressi in Rome. The stadium functioned as part of a major sports complex called the Foro Mussolini. The stadium was started in 1927, but was not finished until 1937, though it had opened in 1932 for limited use. In Turin, the Stadio Benito Mussolini was built in 1934 and was the main stadium for the city and its two teams, Juventus and Torino. While locals and the clubs could design the stadiums and grounds as they saw fit, the designs were made to match fascist ideology, using modern architecture, but also highlighting historic designs of ancient Rome. The stadiums became symbols across Italy of the power of the fascist government. The stadiums, though, were designed to be more than just football stadiums, and they were pushed to be multi-purpose venues. The massive rounded stadiums could shift to host track and field, rugby, races, and non-sporting events such as political rallies. The stadiums were conceived as being theaters for the masses. They allowed for fans and visitors to feel connected to the events on the field and make the atmosphere enticing. The multi-purpose designs made them centerpieces in the towns as they became the places citizens associated with meetings and community gathering. The reorganization of Italian football and the new stadium construction allowed for the sport to develop in Italy and for the national team to advance on the world stage. Mussolini and the fascists wanted to use sports to advance the image of Italy around Europe and the world. In 1934, they successfully were given the rights to host the FIFA World Cup. Started only in 1930, the Italians hosted the World Cup and were determined to prove their skill. Mussolini himself took interest in hosting the tournament, viewing it as an opportunity to showcase the advancement of the nation under fascism. They chose to play matches in the new stadiums, particularly those that were constructed to highlight fascist ideology. Yet what was key was winning. The fascists had invested heavily in making football a highly competitive and strong sport in Italy. Winning would highlight that the intervention of the fascists showed the success of their regime. Mussolini was rewarded with a World Cup victory over Czechoslovakia in the final. Italian success in football was further advanced in the years after, when they won the Olympic gold medal in the 1936 Berlin Olympics, and at the next FIFA World Cup in 1938, hosted by France, when they won again, the first country to repeat their success. Their clubs were also dominating play, with Bologna FC winning the Coppa d'Europa in 1932 and 1934, while they also won the Paris Exhibition Tournament in 1937 to the shock of the rest of the world. The success of Italian teams during the 1930s was used by Mussolini in several ways. First, he used it as tools in his foreign policy. The fascist way of playing sports was proving far more successful than others. Even as Italy was being seen as pariahs on the world stage for their imperialist actions in Africa, success at football showed that the fascists were better. Secondly, the team had become a target for anti-fascist movements around Europe, and when they played, they were subject to boos, taunts, and insults. Mussolini denounced such attacks, arguing that politics should stay at home and did not belong in sports. Of course, this was hypocritical, as Mussolini and his supporters had turned sports into a political tool, and he was not afraid to use the success of international teams to advance his own policies at home. For all the successes of Italian football, Mussolini and the fascists were unable to fully control all aspects of the sport. They found that in supporting the creation of a national league to try and remove regional or local tensions, they only reinforced the local identities as fans became galvanized behind local teams. This was particularly noted in teams which were formed by merging clubs together to be more competitive. In Rome, for example, the four major clubs in 1926 were Roman FC, SS Alba Audaci, Fortitudo Pro Roma SGS, and SS Lazio. A leading Roman fascist, Italo Foschi, initiated a merger of these clubs to create a stronger team from Rome to be able to compete against the powerful teams of northern Italy. The new team, AS Roma, was founded in 1927 and were pushed to represent the capital. However, SS Lazio resisted and were saved from joining AS Roma by General Vaccario, a leading fascist general who was a supporter of Lazio and an executive in the new fascist league, and allowed them to stay independent. The rivalry between Roma and Lazio became massive as locals flocked to their matches seeking to support their chosen club. The tensions, fighting, and disputes these local matches created caused headaches for fascist leaders who thought they were eliminating this. In Florence, the local fascist leader Luigi Ridolfi merged two clubs, CS Firenze and PG Libertas, to form ACF Fiorentina. Created just like Roma to compete against the stronger northern clubs, the creation of Fiorentina helped to unite locals behind their club, and rather than viewing themselves as Italians, it strengthened their regional identity against other parts of Italy. While the club was run by fascists, the fan base proved harder to control as many Fiorentina supporters were not fully convinced of fascism, but they were happy to support their club as a regional representative. While the development of football in Italy saw the widest amount of support amongst Italians, Mussolini and other fascists were not always happy with football. Mussolini viewed the sport with suspicion due to the foreign origins of the game. As tensions grew between Italy and Britain over imperial possessions, Mussolini wanted to move Italians away from playing sports that were tainted with Englishness. The regime made several attempts to alter the sport. The name change from football to calcio was one of the Italian names for the sport that came from an older ball game played in Florence. The game, which was called calcio fiorentino, dated back to the Renaissance of the 14th and 15th centuries. Here, the citizens of Florence, under the rule of the Medici family, played a ball game that can best be described as a mix of football, rugby, wrestling, and boxing. The game had been played for centuries in Florence before waning away. Fascists, looking for an Italian origin to the game of football instead of the English one, turned to calcio fiorentino as proof that Italians had invented football. In 1930, the Florentine Fascist Party resurrected the game with support from Mussolini. Fascist attempts to prove that calcio fiorentino was the original football game did not convince many Italians who continued to play football according to the British rules. Calcio fiorentino also became a distinct marker of Florentine identity, reinforcing their local instead of national identity, and has now become an annual event in the city. You can learn more about the game on Netflix, as it was featured on an episode of the documentary Home Game. The fascists also supported the spread of rugby across Italy, and in 1928 created a national body to organize the sport. As rugby was also an English sport, Mussolini and the fascists tried to label the game as harpistum, an ancient Roman ball game that involved tackling and carrying a ball like rugby. Rugby players, though, were resistant to fascist intervention, leaving Mussolini frustrated with the sport. The new sport of volata was also introduced by Mussolini to move Italians away from football and other foreign sports in 1929. Volata was a mix of calcio fiorentino and harpistum to be a new, modern, and especially fascist sport for Italians. While supported for several years, volata failed to catch on as Italians were more interested in football or simply did not support the fascist regime. In 1933, Mussolini abandoned volata, simply refocusing his efforts on controlling football. The language of sports became important as Mussolini moved to have foreign terms banished from the games. Football became calcio, manager was replaced with maestro, the Roman salute was introduced at the beginning of games, and cheers of hip hurrah were replaced with Italian ea ea alla alla. Many English phrases were translated into distinct Italian terms that were often clumsy to say. However, the language shift had an impact due to the work of Niccolo Carosio, a radio broadcaster. While not a fascist figure, Carosio had a distinct speaking voice, and so was the main sports commentator for the radio beginning in 1933. His use of the terms created by the fascists to describe sports, plus many of his own, has continued to be used in Italy to this day. The legacy of Mussolini and fascism on Italian sports can still be seen to this day. The football league established by the fascists, Serie A, remains, and is now one of the largest and wealthiest leagues in the world. Teams founded by fascists still play, and the stadiums built by the fascists are still in use, only their names have changed. While fascism has been resisted and outlawed in many areas of Italian life, in football and sport it has remained strong. Many radical fans remain supporters of fascism and continue to extol the virtues of Mussolini and his political ideology. Italian fans who express fascist ideology have regularly clashed with other supporters who have socialist or working class supporter fan clubs, and these episodes reveal how ingrained fascist ideology became in Italian football. In 2019, the Scottish club of Celtic FC traveled to Rome to play Lazio. The events in the stands became the major talking point as the Celtic fans, known as the Green Brigade, clashed with the Lazio fans, known as Ultras. Lazio fans were seen delivering the Roman salute to Celtic supporters while yelling fascist slogans and singing fascist songs. Celtic fans responded by hoisting a banner that featured Mussolini after his death being hung upside down with the phrase, "Follow your leader," in response. So while Mussolini and his regime struggled to control sports and shape it to how they wanted, sports and football have proven to be one of the places his political ideas have survived.